Hello and welcome to another enlightening edition of African Monitor. My name is Chioma Innocent and this is the program where I take you around the African continent in about half an hour. Join me as I unveil the common, uncommon, weird, tragic and downright bizarre happenings on the African continent. This is African Monitor. You're welcome. Let us begin in the East African country of Kenya, where talks between the governing Kenya Kwanza and the opposition Azimio la Umoja coalitions to end political tensions over the rising cost of living and electoral reforms are due to resume. Azimio led deadly protests in March and July against President William Ruto's government to demand the reconstitution of the Electoral Commission and the lowering of the cost of living. The unrest worsened after the government introduced higher taxes and levies in July this year to raise revenue for President Ruto's first budget. Now, rights groups have said that at least 30 people died in the protests, but the opposition gave a higher death toll of about 50 people. No time frame has yet been fixed for the talks by a 10-member panel, and divisions have persisted over this agenda. Now, the opposition leader Raila Odinga's team wants to discuss the cost of living and electoral reforms after it lost the elections last year, but the government insists that it is already working to fix inflation and to reduce the cost of some basic commodities. Now, the opposition suspended demonstrations in April and May to allow a similar bipartisan dialogue process, but protests resumed after these talks collapsed. Both President Ruto and the opposition leader, Mr. Odinga, have said that the talks would not lead to any power-sharing deal. We do hope that these talks would, however, lead to a positive impact for the people of Kenya. We'll return to West Africa, where Ghana's main opposition party has given a 3-week ultimatum to the central bank governor and his deputy to resign from office. The National Democratic Congress, NDC, has accused Ernest Addison of recklessness and also of mismanaging the bank, with the bank also being accused of illegally printing money and spending over $8.6 million on travel expenses. A recent annual report of the central bank indicated that it recorded about $5.4 billion in losses just last year. The bank has denied the NDC allegations and attributed the losses to a domestic debt restructuring deal that was part of the conditions for securing a bailout from the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Right now, Ghana is currently trying to navigate its way out of its worst economic crisis in a generation. The country's inflation hit a record 54% in December last year. In May this year, the country secured a $3 billion IMF bailout program to address the economic crisis. We do hope that this fund will be used for positive purposes to impact the people of Ghana positively. Well, a police officer is among the 5 dead in a South African taxi strike, where 5 people, including a 40-year-old British national and a police officer, have died in violent protests related to the taxi strike in Cape Town, South Africa. This comes after a week-long strike was called by the South African National Taxi Council, SANTACO. The strike was in response to what the drivers called heavy-handed tactics by law enforcement authorities in the country. The UK had issued a South Africa travel warning after the strike was listed as a high-security threat. The taxi strike is expected to continue after negotiations broke down between SANTACO and the provincial government, which is led by the Democratic Alliance. Meanwhile, the Transport Minister in South Africa, Sindisiwe Chikunga, has ordered the immediate release of minibus taxis impounded by the city authorities. She said the legislation used by the city had been executed and implemented wrongly. Taxi drivers and owners in South Africa have claims that their vehicles were being targeted and impounded for minor offenses such as not wearing a seatbelt and illegally driving on the emergency lane, whereas other motorists were merely issued fines for similar offenses. and the taxi drivers are not happy about this at all. While on the West African coast, Liberian authorities have arrested and handed over a former Sierra Leonean police chief accused by his country of planning a coup against President Julius Maada Bio's government. You might ask, how can a civilian plan a coup against the government? Well, the Liberian Information Minister Lejahud Reni said in a statement on Tuesday that the police chief Mohamed Waiture was arrested at the request of the Sierra Leonean authorities on the allegation of helping to plan subversive activities intended to unseat and oust President Bio's government. He said Liberia had decided to hand the ex-police chief over to Sierra Leone as requested, following preliminary investigations. Sierra Leone also gave assurances that his rights will be respected, including the right to a fair and speedy trial. But Liberia's Independent National Commission on Human Rights has cautioned against the extradition, citing the risk of surrendered persons facing physical abuse, unfair trial, or excessive punishment by the requesting government. In a statement, it also reminded Liberia's government of its obligations, including refusing extradition requests if the offense is regarded as a political offense or as an offense connected with a political offense. Now, the ex-police chief has been residing in Liberia since last year, as he was among the officers dismissed from the Sierra Leone police force in 2020, while others were forced into retirement. His deportation comes more than a week after the police in Sierra Leone accused unnamed individuals at home and abroad of planning violent protests. Last week, the police said they had arrested several people, including unnamed senior military officers, for working to undermine the peace and tranquility of the state. Now, the World Bank has suspended new loans to Uganda following the country's enactment of a tough law against same-sex relations. President Yoweri Museveni signed the anti-LGBTQ law in May, which imposes the death penalty for aggravated homosexuality and a 20-year jail term for promoting homosexuality. The World Bank said in a statement on Tuesday this week that the law fundamentally contradicts the World Bank Group's values, noting that its vision includes everyone, irrespective of race, gender, or sexuality. The World Bank also said that no new public financing to Uganda will be presented to its Board of Executive Directors pending a review of the efficacy of new measures put up in the context of the new legislation. Well, in response, Uganda has dismissed the move as unjust and hypocritical. Uganda State Minister for Foreign Affairs, Okello Oryem, said there are many Middle East countries that do not tolerate homosexuals, that actually hang and execute homosexuals. He also said in the U.S., many states have passed laws that are either against or restrict activities of homosexuality. So, why pick on Uganda? Well, his question, not mine. Before now, the World Bank has provided up to $4.2 billion in development financing to Uganda by the end of 2022, mostly in health and education projects. In June this year, the International Monetary Fund, that is the IMF, approved the release of $120 million to Uganda, but warned of tighter restrictions on financing over the anti-gay laws of the African country. Now, an Eritrean cultural festival held in Toronto, Canada, has been cancelled by city officials after violent protests broke out between attendees and opponents of the Eritrean government. According to local reports, the protesters say proceeds of the three-day annual festival are used to support the Eritrean government, which has been described by many human rights groups as one of the world's most repressive regimes. The divisions within Eritrea over the rule of President Isaias Afwerki have spilled over into the diaspora. Now, in recent weeks, protesters have disrupted similar festivals in Germany and Sweden. In a statement online, the Eritrean Canadian Community Centre of Metropolitan Toronto, ECCC, describing itself as a non-political charitable organization, said, while it was not associated with the festival, they were deeply concerned by the turn of events as it had consistently received numerous concerns from community members regarding the event organizers' close ties to the Eritrean government. Talk about taking home issues over the seas, the borders, and into the diaspora. Well, the cycle brings us back to the West African country of Niger Republic, where a coup that occurred on July 26 is threatening to tear the region apart, as the Niger military, backed by the armies of other African countries such as Burkina Faso, Mali, and the Republic of Guinea, including international input from the Wagner mercenary group and Russia, are involved in a war of words that may soon turn into a war of guns, with the African Union, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and even the United States. If you think that this is a mouthful, well, here is the timeline of events. After the coup on July 26, where democratically elected president of Niger Republic, Mohamed Bazoum, was ousted and held hostage by his palace guards, General Abdurrahman Chiani took over power and announced that the military had taken over the country. This drew widespread criticism from many presidents in and outside the African continent. 1 week after the coup, France began the evacuation of hundreds of French and European citizens from Niger, with the first 3 flights lifting off 262 passengers from the country. France, Italy, and Spain had all announced evacuations from Niger for their citizens and other European nationals. Now, this came a day after dozens of coup apologists and protesters in Niger attacked the French embassy while denouncing France and waving Russia's flag. The protesters set a door at the embassy ablaze before they were dispersed by the army. Regional bodies swiftly reacted to the power grab, with the West African bloc ECOWAS and the African Union AU lashing at the military and also calling on the plotters to free President Bazoum, while the AU urged the felon soldiers involved to return to barracks immediately. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, also announced a 1-week ultimatum for the coup plotters in Niger to hand over power to the democratically elected government or risk the use of force. The 1-week ultimatum expired on August 6 without the Niger military surrendering to ECOWAS threats and refusing all efforts to dialogue. On August 8, the Niger Junta leaders blocked a senior United States official, Victoria Nuland, from meeting the country's elected president, Mohamed Bazoum. Nuland, who is the Undersecretary of State, said Bazoum is under virtual house arrest. She also described the mutinous officers as unreceptive to U.S. calls to return the country to civilian rule. After a meeting held in the Nigerian capital, Abuja, today, August 10th, ECOWAS has ordered its standby force to restore constitutional order in the Niger Republic. The president of ECOWAS, Omar Aliou Touré, made the declaration while reading the resolution of ECOWAS on the Niger coup at the ECOWAS extraordinary meeting in Abuja today. It also called on the African Union and partner countries and institutions to support the resolution taken by the sub-regional body. ECOWAS said all efforts made to dialogue with the Niger Republic military junta have been defiantly rejected by the coup leaders as they condemn the continuous detention of President Bazoum and his family members. The resolution directed the Committee of the Chief of Defense Staff to activate the ECOWAS standby force with all its elements immediately. Does this mean the West African countries could go to war with each other soon? Even with the international backing, military aid and support, is West Africa ready for a war that would impact greatly on the countries that share land and other borders? We cannot say, but war is not desirable, and we do hope that it is not what West Africa is edging towards right now. Finally, on a lighter note, fans have praised Nigeria's female football team who have arrived back in the home country after narrowly missing out on the quarter-finals at the Women's World Cup. They're also calling on the National Football Authority to hand over the players unpaid bonuses, allowances and expenses. The Super Falcons had sailed through to the last 16 but were knocked out of the competition by England following a dramatic penalty shootout. Despite losing to the European champions, Nigeria were arguably the better team throughout Monday's clash, if I do say so myself. They held the game at 0-0 draw but eventually lost 4-2 on penalties. In the group stages, the 9-time African champions had beaten co-host Australia and finished above Olympic gold medalist Canada. The Nigerian President Bola Tinubu was among those who praised the squad after they were knocked out of the tournament, writing on Twitter, now called X, "I must commend the efforts by our Super Falcons at the FIFA Women's World Cup. Your brilliant performance did not go unnoticed despite the final outcome. You made Nigeria proud on the global stage." Great job by the Super Falcons, I must say. And right now, Nigerians both at home and in the diaspora are super proud of the game you all have played. Well, that is all I have lined up for you on today's edition of African Monitor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It is a Voice of the People television. Follow us on all social media platforms at VOP TV Live. My name is Choma Innocent. Until I come your way again next time, keep watching VOP Television.